Hello
Okay.
and welcome everybody to the fourth and final class. Unfortunately, it's been an amazing series with our master teacher, Nachli Sullivan, the museum guy, who's been giving us a guided tour of ancient Persia through the story of Purim. And for today's class, we're going to be leaving archaeology somewhat and instead focusing on the themes of Purim, specifically the concept of miracles. And what a treat we have, as Nachleo has been nothing short of an inspirational lecturer. And we're going to have you back. It's that simple. We are going to have you back. So without any further to do, I'm going to hand over, and it's my absolute pleasure for our fourth class to offer Nachleo Salavan.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone, and good afternoon. I shall say I have to get used to the time difference. So, Esther and the End of Miracles. I would like to delve into uh, I would say, the most important philosophical aspect of this period of time known as the Persian period, or rather the transition from the First Temple period to the Second Temple period, which you can say in a nutshell is characterized by a world of miracles and a world in which we operate without the assumption of miracles constantly being there. And that's a very well grounded conversation. I would like to show, though, how it fits into the story of Esther, the Megillah, and to sort of parse the different components of that most important conversation in the story where this thing happens, so that we could drive the point home and really understand why it is so important. So, before we delve into this more philosophical conversation, I want to first, let's open our books and look and let the magic happen. But before we get into it, I want to just sort of frame it so we all know where we are historically, what we're talking about, the timeline, and so on and so forth. So first of all, introducing a painting by actually a female painter from Italy, a Renaissance painter known as Artemisia Gentileschi. It is currently in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's a very large painting. I figured it would be a nice painting to sort of thread throughout the picture, because this is the story we're talking about. We're talking about Esther's daring move, her risking her life on behalf of her people to come in before Achashverosh and beseech the king, and to destroy to get rid of the decree to destroy the Jewish people. So that's the story that we're talking about. So let's get some background so we can delve into the story and appreciate it better. But this painting, of course, has a lot of theater to it and theatricality, and it's got an interesting story for another time. But you should know that they actually X-rayed this painting and discovered that Artemisia Gentileschi actually painted a dog next to Achashverosh, who's sitting on his throne here, and decided in the last minute, I guess, to cover him up, that he wasn't really appropriate for the painting, but he's there and you can see him in X-ray. All this and more when you look up this painting on the Met's website. But anyway, so here's our basic timeline. Not to overwhelm you with the chronology, but just to point out that the four kings, which are in purple, are the only ones, as far as we're concerned, in Jewish history that are important, that are mentioned in Tanakh. From Cyrus the Great, who we've covered in lesson 1, to Darius the Great and Achashverosh, who we covered in lesson 2, to Artaxerxes, who we covered in lesson 3, where we went into the Persian period in Israel. And somewhere in between 2 and 3 is the Purim story. That's where it's happening. In other words, the beginning of the rebuilding of Jerusalem has begun. It was sort of left on hold for political reasons, and then it resumes after and probably as a result of the Purim story. So that's where we're holding. And of course, the Persian period ends with Alexander the Great. And I also want to mention this really cool piece, this diorama from the 1950s, which is in Jerusalem. It's in Heichal Shlomo. And it shows you an imaginary Queen Esther being led by servants, as you see right here, before King Achashverosh. There's Mordechai sitting there and talking to Achashverosh, and it's kind of an imaginary scene. But other than Achashverosh sitting there with his scepter, which is kind of accurate when we've seen the archaeology, all the rest I'm reminding you is inaccurate. The design, the patterns, the style, because the excavations in Shushan hadn't happened yet. So while there was a different palace in Persepolis, they didn't necessarily make the connection. So that's an interesting story. That's why they didn't get anything right. And all of this is just our introduction. Now let's go into our story. So our story, I broke it up into a few pieces, and it all comes down to Esther's dilemma. So let's begin at the end. We'll talk about her dilemma, and then we'll take it apart to different parts, like what are the different components to the conversation that got her to actually take this risk and to risk her life and to go into Achashverosh and actually beg him, right? What was the story that led up to her making that decision, to her changing her mind? And then we'll go back to the story. So we're going to visit it several times. So we are in the palace in Shushan. And a little bit about background about the palace. You can see that there are a few open courtyards in the palace, which was common in Mesopotamian palaces. And the one that's more or less in the center of the painting, here I will add some arrows to make it easier. This is what's known as the king's royal chambers or quarter. And this area is the courtyard, the inner courtyard, which you would have to go through to see the king. The area behind is what's known as the women's courtyard, or the harem, and this is the outer courtyard. And this area here is known as the King's Gate, which is a separate edifice, sort of like an airport. It's sort of like in between on your way to, and it's a massive complex. And this is where Mordechai is sitting when he's communicating through the vehicle of Hatach, who is the servant, the royal servant of Esther, and the conversation between them is happening as follows. So this is the conversation. These are the locations, which is really cool, by the way. We actually know where the story took place down to the details, right? So Mordechai is sitting at the king's gate. Esther is spending her time, I guess, in the royal quarters. Maybe there was a nicer room for the queen. I don't know. And the question is, does she take the risk of making her way through the network of chambers to come and see the king, when the policy at this time is that if you are uninvited to see the king, you will get shot, right? Even if it's the king's wife. And the king has many reasons to be paranoid and afraid of Esther, whose identity she keeps secret. He doesn't know her identity. She seems to be so malleable and pleasing towards him that it's just too good to be true. And he's just waiting for the opportunity to hear what her motive, what her agenda is. She's a sleeper, basically, as far as he's concerned. Like, suddenly she comes in and says, like, oh, my dear husband, can I just invite you to a party? And of course, he can't sleep that night because he thinks that, I guess, she's up to something. Why is she inviting Haman? And I'm assuming we all know the story. So there's a lot to unpack here, but the fact that she hasn't seen him for 30 days is no joking matter. And he is, of course, become more and more paranoid. So let's get into this story. So the story goes like this. This time I actually am bringing the text because it's less of a tour. So I made sure to actually bring the English. This is mostly the JPS translation, which I found on Sefaria. Sometimes I made a small change. I'll mention it if it's necessary. So Hatach is communicating Hatach is the go-between Esther and Mordechai to try to figure out why Mordechai is in sackcloth, because of the decree. What happened? Don't you know? And of course, he tries to tell her, listen, you have to do something on behalf of the Jewish people, and back and forth and back and forth. So here's the key part of the conversation. Esther says to Mordechai, Kol avdei hamelech, and I'll paraphrase, but all of the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman, enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, that he is put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him may he live. Now, I added two pieces of archaeology here that we've seen at different points throughout this tour to sort of add to the impact of the archaeology when we learn the story. So there's Achashverosh from the treasury in Persepolis sitting on his throne, kind of like that little diorama we saw from Michal Shlomo, with his scepter, with his the scepter that he's going to now extend to whoever he decides will not be killed. And on top of him is a relief. They're actually in the Louvre today, but they're from Shushan, that show the Persian royal guard. So that's what we're talking about. These people will kill anyone who threatens the king, who gets anywhere near without being invited. So the king is clearly afraid for his life, afraid even of his own wife, and if she gets near, she knows that she's going to get killed. So now Esther has to actually make this decision. And she says to Mordechai, listen, I mean, it's been an entire month since I last got a phone call from my hubby. So what am I supposed to do? And I'm just adding this is in parenthetically, the royal guard. The royal guard of the kings of Persia are known through the writings, the histories of the Greeks, primarily Herodotus, as the immortals. And the reason they are called the immortals is because they always had a fixed number of soldiers. I think it was 10,000. And if any would get killed in battle, then they would immediately be replaced. So you have a set number. They're always there. It's called the immortals. Kind of a cool concept. So this is the royal guard, which will put her to death. So this is the dilemma. Now, on its face, it sounds like let's just say that this one line, which everybody in the street knows this, seems a little bit superfluous. It kind of sounds like what the editor of the Megillah had to tell us because we don't have the knowledge of every person in the street, right? So it's put in there, but why would she need to go through this lengthy conversation and tell him that this is a crazy idea to ask me to risk my life to go in and talk to the king? So this is our story. And I would like to unpack this and then go back to it several times so we can uncover deeper layers of what's going on. But this is our main story. This is it. All right. So first of all, let's get into the background. King Saul's second choice. According to the genealogy as well as Jewish tradition, Esther is the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of King Shaul, King Saul, who was the first king of Israel and of the tribe of Benjamin. Now, he messed up and did not kill the king of Amalek, who was the great-great-great-grandfather of Haman. And we're talking about the Agag. Haman is called Haman HaAgagi, and the king who Shaul did not kill is Agag. So this story, first of all, is referenced here in the story. And here is, we're starting to take it apart. So, Mordechai says to Esther, Al tedami benafshech limalet bet hamelech mikol haYehudim. Don't imagine that you of all Jews will escape with your life by being in the king's palace, because, on the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter or another place, while you and your father's house will perish. So, according to the Talmud, and basically our tradition is that At Ubeit Avich is saying not only will you as an individual, Esther, be lost, you will perish, but the entire history that brought you to who you are, which is your father's lineage, will be lost. Which means we are alluding to the story that she is now having an opportunity to fix. In other words, she is Saul 2.0. This is fixing the issue. She has the opportunity to correct the mistake that Saul did. So before we get into the miracles and all the more sophisticated things, on the very basic level, let's understand what did Saul get wrong and see that there are also some very interesting literary connections between the story of Shaul and Amalek and the story here of the great-great-grandchildren, the descendants of those antagonists and protagonists of Shaul and Agag and Esther and Haman. And then the final line that he says to her is, listen, who knows? I mean, perhaps you've attained the royal position for just such an opportunity or such a crisis. Like, this is your moment. Like, this is your opportunity to bring it all together. So far, so good. Let's get into the backstory, and we're going to go into the story of Shaul. So first of all, let's talk about how Esther, we're saying maybe this is how you got here. How did Esther get to this moment? Well, it has to do with the deposition or perhaps execution, it's kind of ambiguous about that, of Vashti, who of course refused to show up when the king invited her. And that's this another beautiful painting by Edwin Long. This is in Orlando, but there's a few paintings like this. There's Rembrandt paintings. Like there's so many paintings about the Esther story to pick from. I had to pick one, but this is one of many options that I had. And by the way, the background of this painting, the archaeology is quite correct. It's sound. They have reliefs that look like those layers of people coming and bringing tribute to the emperor. And even if you look at the edge of the back of her seat, it has that bull that you found on the pillars in Shushan. So they did the archaeology better. If you look really, really carefully, I'm just having fun. So, you can put this together and see the work that's put into this artwork. Here's Achashverosh sitting on his throne with the scepter and somebody standing before him. We've seen this on our second and possibly even our third tour. We've seen this and all these people and this. So it's just fun. It's fun to be able to see how the artist really did their homework. It's a fairly recent painting. The artist did their homework. So let's see what happens with Vashti. All right. So the royal decree about Vashti, which is issued in that emergency meeting, press conference, the king is gathering together all of his advisors. What shall we do about this queen? And Memuchan, who was perhaps his Haman, says, if the king, if it pleases your majesty, let a royal edict be issued by you, and let it be written into the laws of Persia and Media so that it cannot be abrogated, that Vashti shall never enter the presence of King Achashverosh. Okay, and now the last part, which I made in blue, this is the key phrase. Umalchuta yiten hamelech lereuta hatova mimena. Your majesty will bestow her royal estate upon another who is more worthy than she. Now here is where the key word, this phrase, shows up in the story of Shaul. And here it is. We'll get to the story in a moment, but at least the ending of the story. So Shmuel says to Shaul, after he failed to fulfill his mission, and Shmuel abandons him, leaves him after ripping a piece of his garment, saying, God has ripped the kingdom away from you. He says to him, Shamuel said to him, the Lord this day has torn the kingship over Israel away from you, and has given it to another who is worthier than you. Now I put them one on top of the other, so you can see it. One is in the male form, one is in the female form. But here's where we have a hint, a foreshadowing of a king who will be better than you, who will do a better job than you. In this case, it will be Esther, who will have the historic opportunity to correct what you have wronged way down the road. This is really cool, but it's not our only connection to the story of King Saul. But this is the first hint that we have. The second part and is related to a part we're going to unpack in the end, but I'm bringing it here so you have it. Not King Saul. Samuel, before he leaves Shaul, says to him, this is the direct continuation, וגם נצח ישראל לא ישקר ולא ינחם, כי לא אדם הוא להנחם. The eternity of Israel, or JPS says glory, but I think eternity is more accurate, does not deceive or change its mind, for he is not a human that he should change his mind. In other words, you, King Saul, have a higher purpose than to worry about your personal issues and political agendas. You have to do what needs to be done for the purpose of the eternity of Israel, which is sort of like an entity or an enterprise or a concept, a reality, if you will. This is what needs to be done. And if you make a mistake, you're out. But the story will have to go, the show must go on, as Queen said. So this is part one of the story. Now let's connect it to the descendant who came out of the mistake that Shaul made in this story. Okay, another painting. Again, I could have chosen many of these. One of them, Luca Giordano, the war of Israel and Amalek. So we're going to connect a few things together here, and my assumption is that you're familiar with the concept, so I don't have to go over all of the details. So just in a nutshell, when we left Egypt, this nation called Amalek sort of attacked our stragglers. In other words, they attacked us where we were vulnerable. And there ended up being a war against Amalek, and Moshe lifts his arms up, and when Israel looks up to his hands, look up to heaven, we win, and when we don't, when his hands are down, we lose. That's the whole story. And at the end of this, we have what we read on Purim, right, which is Zachor. So let's put these two things together. So Shaul is commanded to sort of continue this ongoing battle and to destroy a segment of Amalek who are located in a certain area of the south, Havilah until Shur. And Shaul actually fulfills that. He does that. Shaul destroys Amalek or smites Amalek from Havilah all the way to Shur, which is more or less in the area of Beersheba, going towards El Arish, all the way to Egypt. And then he captures Agag, the king of Amalek, alive. He does not kill him as he should have. And he prescribed all the people, putting them into the sword. In other words, he basically took everything and confiscated it, but he didn't actually get rid of all the memory of Amalek. And this was his failing. This was the failing that we are discussing. Okay? So what happens after this? Shaul, of course, has mercy on Agag, and it's Shaul v'ha'am. So the people, the troops, spared Agag. They had mercy on him. And basically they decided, let's not destroy this people because, there's all this good stuff. We could use the spoils of war. This was his mistake. And as we know, that as a result of this, Haman Ha'agagi comes around, and then we have Shaul 2.0. So far, what I'm trying to point out is that Esther is simply the second historic iteration of this clash between Amalek and between Israel. And she, as the descendant of Shaul, has the opportunity to correct what's wrong, dealing with the descendant of Agag. That's probably what Mordechai is referring to by saying, At ubeit avich tovedu, you and your father's house will be gone. So that's her story so far. Our next part has to do with, so why is Haman or Agag or Amalek such a major part of the story? I mean, we read about it on Purim. We read Parashat Zachor on the Shabbat before Purim. It's a big deal. Everybody comes to shul, and you hear people reading it at Timchet Zecher Amalek, at Zecher Amalek, and then the Yemenites come and read it their way, and the Sephardim this way and that. Like every iteration, like sometimes they do that. Sometimes they just keep it simple. We make a very big deal about the story of Amalek and its connection to Purim. So let's unpack that, because I think that this is the key to understanding the change in the conversation, which led Esther to accept her fate and to go in risking her life and make the difference for the Jewish people. This is the missing part that we need to put it all together. So let's get into our story. In a nutshell, the essence of Amalek. Who is Amalek? So we have Amalek, and Amalek, this is another painting, of course, of Moshe and Aaron and Hur holding his hands up. It's interesting because Aaron is actually a little bit older than Moshe, but here Moshe looks older than him, so you know what leadership does to you. Amalek and the shadow of doubt. In our sources, we look at Amalek as both a people and also you can say a force of nature or an existential concept, which is putting in the seeds of doubt. And Amalek, in the numerical value of Amalek, the gematria is safek, is doubt, which is kind of a cool thing. And right after we met Amalek in the desert, we started asking ourselves, Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im ayin? Is God with us? Is he not with us? Is he forsaken us? Like, how did they get a nation who just left Egypt and has witnessed the most incredible miracles to suddenly doubt if God's actually paying attention to them and is with them? So Amalek is clearly a very powerful force, and let's meet them. So first of all, we leave Egypt. Miracles and AI has also added ships and swords and made it a lot more fun, but it's basically we're crossing the Red Sea. And here's what we say in Parashat Zachor, which we read the Shabbat before Purim. Zachor, as we know, et asher asa lecha Amalek b'derech b'tzitechem miMitzrayim. I want you to remember, and this is a bit of a difficult term because it doesn't really mean to remember. It means to be mindful of. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek, when you were on your journey after you left Egypt. The reason I mention this is because nobody would remember Amalek if we wouldn't have the commandment to forget them. So it sounds a little bit contradictory. It's like I have a friend who like every year calls my friend and he says, don't forget to remember to forget the memory of Amalek. It's like, it sounds absurd, but the truth is that Zachor in Hebrew doesn't mean to pull a memory out of a file cabinet, but rather it means to be mindful of something. And that's actually how you erase The memory of their impact is by being mindful of the message that they're trying to erase. So that's something to consider. And what did they do? Well, what they did is, they did two things, which we're going to expand. Asher karecha baderech, vayizanev becha kol hanechashalim acharecha. They, undeterred by the fear of God, he surprised you on the march. And I made sure that you see that surprised in English is blue, and in Hebrew it's karecha. But the word karecha and surprise are not you could translate like that because mikre means happenstance. Like they just happened upon you. Like suddenly they just like out of nowhere, right? When you're on the march, when you were famished and weary and cut down all the stragglers in the rear, which is the word zanav. Zanav means tail. So they sort of like tailgated us and got rid of the people who weren't under the direct protection of God. Okay? So let's expand this a little bit. The words karecha and vayizanev. And I think that the best metaphor that I have seen in recent years that helps us understand and relate to the power of this attack is the movie Batman and the Dark Knight. Now, I don't know if you've seen Batman and the Dark Knight. You don't need to, but I'm sure you've heard of Batman and you've heard of the Joker. There are many iterations of this, different movies. There's one with Michael Keaton. There's one with whatever. There's a lot of Batmans out there. I think that this one with the Joker is perhaps the most profound one. It's a dark movie. It's also deeply philosophical. It doesn't discuss the philosophy. It puts you through the experience of the philosophy of nihilism, of chaos, of the ability to attack the stability of a society by just attacking a few stragglers without fighting them head on. So in essence, the attack of I'm just going to sort of frame the idea of the Joker for our purposes without going into all of the details, all right? The idea of the Joker is he is a joker. He makes fun of everything. Asher karecha baderech literally means also cooled you off. Cool down, you're not such hot stuff. Don't think that just because God took you out of Egypt, you're really that special. I'll prove it to you. I'm not going to attack you headlong because I won't survive. I'm simply going to make you give up on the purpose of this whole story by simply attacking a few people who aren't under direct protection. That's all I got to do. The metaphor for that is terror, which we are currently seeing how powerful that is. Like on the battlefield, we know that Hamas cannot stand a chance against Israel. So you use terror. You attack civilians. You shoot it's a drive-by shooting. You attack someone in the supermarket. People, God forbid, people lose their faith in the structure of society that keeps everything together. They are impacted by seeds of doubt through the cynicism of terror. Amalek represents cynicism, joking about things, making fun of things, belittling things without really having a serious conversation about the issues, but simply saying, who cares? Why do you think you're such hot stuff? So this is the way we look at Amalek, and the way they achieve that is simply by attacking the stragglers, and by doing that, they cooled us off at great personal risk. And this is why the Midrash has a beautiful metaphor, which Rashi also brings on this source, is that it's like a person who's afraid to jump into a boiling hot pool because he'll get burned. But some crazy guy jumps headlong into the pool and comes out completely covered in scars. But he cooled off the pool. It can be done. Amalek showed the world that it can be done. You can attack Israel. You'll get burned, but you've cooled them down, right? So this idea of cool, of karcha, of happenstance as well, the surprise, the happening, that's what creates doubt. Of course, in the movie, if you're familiar, this is the kind of attack that makes Batman give up on himself, because Batman undermines his essence, right, through belittling it. So this is important to understand when we're dealing with Amalek. And now I want to take us to the story of miracles. I would like to remind you that the story of Amalek happens at the height of miracles, at the time in which we have seen, as the Talmud says, that a simple maid has seen on the sea what the greatest of the prophets like Ezekiel, Yechezkel hasn't seen in the Maaseh Merkavah, in the vision of the chariot. It's like, what can you do? You just had to be there. It was a miraculous time. This is in Parashat Beshalach, which is the parasha that has the most amount of miracles. And that is when we have the most amount of complaints, which reach their peak with saying, is God even within us? Hayesh Hashem b'kirbenu im ayin? Like that happens deliberately, specifically at the height of miracles. And you wonder, like, is this a coincidence? Like, how is it that when we have the most miracles, the parsha is structured in such a way that it's a mirror image from Bishalach and the song on the sea all the way to people saying, nah, God probably doesn't even care about us after Amalek attacks us. Like, how is that even possible, right? It's because of this. And it's specifically because of the fact that there are so many miracles that Amalek has the opportunity to plant seeds of doubt in our hearts. And the Rambam, Maimonides, says this very, very clearly. And I'm bringing just the short quote, but the source is listed here on top. So he says as follows. He says, Moshe Rabbeinu, lo ha'eminu b'mivnei otot she'asan. We did not believe in Moses because of the miracles, the wonders that he performed. Right? Those were there. They were temporarily to keep us there until we get to Mount Sinai and we hear God speaking and reveal. That's really just temporary. It's a patch, right? It's a band-aid. Why? She'ama'amin al pi ha'otot. Yesh belibo dofi, she'efshar yaseh ot belat v'kishuf. Whoever believes, or their belief is based on miracles or wonders, they don't really, there's a place of doubt in their heart. I don't know, maybe it's a miracle, maybe it's aliens, maybe it's a superior technology. Like, who knows, right? I mean, we can imagine that the revelation at Sinai could have been orchestrated by some advanced civilization. I mean, as Einstein said, to a person living a mere, 100 years ago, I'm probably botching up the quote, but our technology looks like magic. It's nothing short of magic. So maybe it's just a superior race. I mean, miracles aren't really great. And that's really important. And I would like to show you two things. Number one, we're going to go back to the conversation with Mordechai and Esther and show where this comes up, and then we'll sort of put it together. So when Mordechai is talking to Esther, he says to her, one second, here we are. He says, if you will be silent in this moment, this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another place. So we focused on Atu Bet Avich Tovedu. We focused on the history that brought her to this moment. But what does Mordechai mean? We're going to be saved no matter what. We don't need you, Esther. You and your family, all of that will perish, but we will succeed. Like, what? Where did that come from? How do you know that? How is this possible? And this is really where Esther, through realizing the flaw in Mordechai's argument, put him in his place. And then Mordechai came back and said, you know what, Esther, you're right. And let me explain this, and then we'll move forward. Mordechai says to Esther, you need to go and speak to the king, right? And Esther says to him, I mean, I don't know if you're being serious. Are you joking? Like, ask, you know what? How about ask any person in the street? Okay, pull anyone, random person in the street, pull him over and ask them. Here's the quote that we saw earlier. What are the chances of this plan to succeed? And anybody will tell you throughout the kingdom, you're insane. It's infinitesimal. It's 1 in a billion. This is no chance. Like, you're going to get shot, right? And you're telling me that I have to take an insane chance because I'm a Jew and I happen to be in the court. I'm telling you this has 0 chance of success. Ask anyone in the kingdom. And that's why this quote is here. It's not that it's necessarily an edit later, because obviously Mordechai knew this. And before she says, well, I haven't seen my hubby in 30 days. So what's the big deal? Oh, because you need to know that at the time of the story, anyone in the street knew that, no, she's telling him, This is a crazy mission. It is a suicidal mission. And what's implied here is as follows. If the entire history, the survival, if the entire survival of the Jewish people is dependent on such a crazy action that does not have a chance to succeed, then I'm sorry, but whoever planned this story didn't do a very good job. I'm sorry, the writer did a bad. This can't be the end. It can't be the way it's supposed to happen, right? It can't be. It doesn't add up. So if this is the story, and I need to go to do something insane, then it's not worth it. The story itself is not all that important. And Mordechai realizes, gosh, she's right. She is absolutely right. We do not need you. The people, Israel does not need you. The Jewish people will survive. It needs to survive. It must survive. It is part of the narrative of creation. It has to survive. So therefore, he says, you know what? You're right. Well, we will be saved. I do not know where. I do not know how. I have no idea. What I know for sure is that it's definitely going to happen. So, but you will be lost because this was your moment. And we'll unpack that last final part in just a moment. But here's where it gets really interesting, because apparently what was going through Mordecai's head? Why would he have even suggested such a crazy, radical risk-taking? Why would he do it? Because the assumption was, well, if this is important and it's part of the story, well, then God's going to come in and there will be a miracle and something's going to happen. You just have to take the first step. He believes in miracles. And the thing about miracles is that miracles always cause problems, right? As we know the famous saying from the cereal, tricks are for kids. Now, she says to him, basically, Mordecai, I don't know if you've noticed, but we've been in exile for the past, I don't know, 50 years, 70 years. There haven't been any miracles here. We are in darkness, to the point where the Talmud says that there's a hint to Esther in the Torah by Anuchi Aster Astir Panai. I will hide my countenance, my face from you. And that's a reference to Esther. We are in a time of darkness, in a time in which God's actions in the world, his involvement, are not seen. Nobody's seen miracles in years. And you're just expecting a miracle to suddenly happen when everything is playing against us? It just doesn't make sense. So we're almost finished, but I want to just drive this point home, is that miracles, tricks are for kids. The story of Esther is dealing with adults. We are dealing with a grown-up nation who has moved way past the infantile stage of the children leaving Egypt, right? Who see miracles and like, oh wow, it's like a magic trick, and do it again, and can you make that disappear? And no, that's gone. We've changed to a different paradigm, to a different world, the world of Esther, the world of God in hiding. And if that's the case, Esther brings out that we have transitioned away from a world of miracles to a world in which our survival and continuity is part of the fabric of creation, and it needs to happen. So that's where she's coming from. And this is where I'm going to put it all together. Esther and the end of miracles. On Purim, we read Tehillim Chafbet, Psalm 22, which is it's a song by King David, which has to do with a lot of the tragedies in his life, but it's seen as a prophecy or an allusion to the key moments in Esther's life in which she has to make the proper adjustments before going in to speak to the king, right? So there's a lot to unpack there. I'm just going to bring the opening verse. And it says, Lamenatzach al ayelet hashachar mizmor leDavid. For the leader, Lamnetzach, the conductor, on ayelet hashachar, which an ayelet is a doe, a deer, a hind, of the dawn. Ayelet hashachar, a psalm of David. And I brought the extra explanations here below. So ayelet hashachar, it might even describe a certain kind of musical note, rhythm, etc. Okay, fine. So the Talmud asks the following question, and it goes into a lot of details. I'm just focusing on one of them. Rabbi Asi said, Lama nimshela Esther l'shachar? Why was Esther likened to the dawn? Lomar lecha, ma hashachar sof kol halayla, is to say, just as the dawn is the conclusion of the entire night, kach Esther sof kol hanisim. So too Esther was the conclusion or the end of all miracles. Now, actually, in the movie Batman, they say the night is the darkest before the dawn. It's just really nice how those ideas tie together in Batman: The Dark Knight. There's like we could do a whole class just on that Batman movie, but that's my, I love that stuff. But here's the idea: the conversation with Esther has brought out that the people of Israel, the Jewish people, do not need miracles. Not that there aren't miracles, but we don't need them to justify our identity, our direction, our survival, our being. We are the story of Israel is the story of this world and where it is going. It is part of the fabric of creation. It must work out in the end. But it can be chaotic. There's different ways you can get there. I mean, we're already talking about quantum physics and Heisenberg's uncertainty. I mean, the ideas that we're talking about here are much more sophisticated and difficult to grasp than miracles. Tricks are for kids. We're dealing with statistics and probability here. And here's where you actually see it. And with this, I'm going to wrap up. So Mordechai tells Esther, on the one hand, the Jewish people do not need you. But perhaps this moment was there for you. So what does this mean? He says to her, as we've seen, so in other words, the narrative of the Jewish people will succeed eventually. You will be lost. However, on the other hand, mi yodea im le'et kazot igat lamalchut. I'm just going to bring one last point here before I wrap this up, is the story of where this idea is expressed in the story of Shaul and how he was rejected from being king because of his failure. When Shmuel tells him, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker velo yinachem, the Netzach, the eternity of Israel, does not deceive or change its mind. In other words, like Mordechai tells Esther, the story of Israel will continue. It is eternal. It will continue. You dropped out. You opted out. That was your choice. But you could choose to be part of the story, because there's many different ways this novel could be written. It could be written with you. It can be written without you. But the end is known. The end is we will succeed. And that is what Shmuel tells Shaul. And so Mordechai tells Esther, while on the one hand, I cannot guarantee that you will survive, but I can guarantee you with 100% that the Jewish people will survive. But you have been put in this moment, perhaps, I don't know, maybe you have been put in this moment for you, so that you could be part of this grand story. And this is when Esther turns everything around and she says, if this is the case, then fast for me and pray for me. And if I have to take this chance, I'll take this chance. I'm willing to take the risk, but not because the entire survival of the Jews depends on me, because it doesn't depend on me, because my connection to the story depends on my actions. And Purim teaches us that our connection to the narrative is what makes the story unique and different. We could choose to be part of the story. We could choose to not be part of the story, but there's no miraculous intervention that is necessary for the story to justify itself. This is why Esther is the end of miracles. So let's take a breath. This was our presentation. It's a little bit shorter than our tour, but I really hope that it sheds a new light onto the importance of the story of Esther, because there is so much nuance going on in this story, besides all the other stuff, the archaeology and that's all great stuff, but it's such a beautiful story with such nuance, and like the mission, it ends up being named after her. It's Esther's story. It's not the story of the Jews. It's the story of Esther, right? It's an incredible thing. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share this with you. And if anybody would like to comment or ask questions, that's fine, but I'm turning it back to you, Rabbi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions? Is there anybody that would like to
I have a
raise
question.
any? This was amazing. Nachliel, thank you so much. This was action-packed. You touched on so many different things, and this was a whole new way of looking at Purim. I hope people have gained a whole new way of looking at Esther and this amazing story. Bala, was that a hand up, or you were just taking off your glasses?
No, it's a hand up.
A hand up. Okay, good. Yes.
So my thought is that I'm wondering if Esther was kind of like Navalny, who went into battle kind of because she felt bigger than life, and what her purpose was to improve or have a legacy. And I guess when you say the stories about Esther, she did have a legacy, and that she thought bigger than the small thinking.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how much to connect it to Navalny. I mean, Navalny knew what he was getting into, right?
Yeah,
he knew what he was getting into. I can't add all the historic details to him and his family, but I'm saying, like, his wife talked about it, right? Like, he knew the risks that he was taking, and who knows what the ripple effects of his actions will be.
Well, from my point of view, I would think that he would think that he wants it to be carried on. He's a martyr, really. He went in there, and also that he's different from the rest of most people. Who would ever go that far and risk your life? He knew what he was doing. He knew he would be arrested and probably killed. And maybe there are people like that who have this, who are beyond the average person, who the cause is greater than the person.
Perhaps. So, and it's a very
maybe Esther had that in her.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, it seems clear that once she realized that kasher avadati avadati, I mean, that's what she said. You know, if I'm gone, I'm gone. But this is, I could live out a comfortable life and never have to deal with the fate of my people, but she'd perish. Nobody would know who she is. Right. And so, yeah, I mean, she didn't die, but she was willing to.
She was willing to.
Because she realized that her personal life then wouldn't, like, you know, it wouldn't be worth it if she didn't do this. This is her moment. She needed to act. This is when that's why we give people a medal of glory posthumously. You know, like that's the idea of Netzach. The idea of the eternity is you stand up for a value that is greater than my personal individual life. I'm part of the story, and those things do make an impact. Yes, Gloria. Yeah. Is raising her hand.
Do you want to ask a question, Gloria? You can take yourself off of mute, or maybe that was just pushing the hand icon. Okay. Maybe not. Okay.
Okay.
I would like to wrap up by saying another thank you to our amazing tour guide and for this incredible lesson on Esther and miracles from Nachliel Sullivan. Thank you so much, Nachliel, for teaching us, for being with us over this series. It was exceptional. It really, really was exceptional. And I look forward to further collaborations in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.